Welcome back to the LinkedIn clone. In this video, we'll be implementing all of the CRUD operations on the Ionic Angular application. So let's just give a quick demonstration of what we'll achieve today. So if we go ahead and we create a post, we get a modal here, and I can say this is the new starting post. I can post that. It brings it up to the top. I can go ahead and I can delete this second post here, CDD, it deletes that, and I can go ahead and I can edit this new starting post, and I'll just call it new post. And if I go ahead and check my database and refresh on the feed post, and we scroll down, we'll see that we've got this new post, and we can see that we've got one of those other ones deleted here. Now you will notice that these are occurring in reverse order. So we'll just spend a couple of minutes just on the back end side of things to reverse the list. I didn't deem it necessarily to create a whole new video on the back end, although I have tried to separate as best as I can between the front end and back end. This is just a quick fix. So if I go ahead and I open up my project, the 4 routes we'll be using are in the feed controller in the API folder, so make sure you CD there, and we can see that we're using a JSON Web Token guard, and recall that is ensuring that we have a valid JSON Web Token, i.e. that we're logged in as a user. And that's the same for both the post and the get request. So we're able to get all of the feed posts, and we can create a post. And to edit or delete a post, we need to ensure that we are the right creator of that post. So we have this is creator guard, and we've created those in the previous videos. So what I want to do is I just want to slightly edit this find post so I can reverse the order. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to use a query builder for a more complicated query. This is only going to take a minute, but if you have a query through this type-orm interface, you want to, and you have something complex to do, so we'll be using an inner join between 2 tables, so we can also get the author from the post and the data associated with that. And we also want to order by, and we also want to take and skip some of the records as per the pagination in the infinite scrolling. So because it's a slightly more complex query, I thought it would be a good idea to use the create query builder. But I'm just going to leave this here as reference. So we're still going to take in a number and skip a certain amount of numbers. And we're still going to return a feed post array. So let's say on the front end side of things, they want to take 10 initially and not skip any. Then we'll get the first 10 feed posts, but we actually want to reverse that. So I'm still going to use this return from to convert the promise into an observable. But this is where things will differ. So we will use the repository, but I'm going to use the create query builder. Now this takes an alias, and this alias is based on this repository. So recall, if we look at the repository in the models here for post entity, we have this many-to-one relationship. So many posts can have one author. And if I go to the auth into those models for the user entity, we can see that one user has many feed posts. So when we're referring to this feed post repository, we're referring to this, and there's also this relationship. So we're going to need to get that data in, because we're going to need that on the front end. So we just have that alias there, post, to represent this post entity and that repository. So we're able to call this inner join and select method. So they'll do exactly as it says. It will join the tables together on something. So we've got this post entity here, and it contains an author, and this author represents this author here, this user here. So we can actually just go ahead, and for that alias we've denoted above, post, we can go ahead and access the author. And how we want to join that is using the author key. So type ORM smart enough to recognize that this author on this post is the relation through this many to one, one to many relation. So they'll automatically join the table on those keys or those columns and select those rows. However, we do want to make it in descending order. So we can just go ahead and we can use this order by. Now we can just go ahead and we can just say order by post created at, because that's what we've named our column here. And there's timestamps in the Postgres database, and we want it in descending order. So the newest posts are going to be at the top. So we can add a second parameter here, DESC for descending. Now we only want to take as many as we need to take, and that's going to be based on our infinite scroll pagination. So we'll just say we'll take the take amount, and we'll skip the skip amount, and finally we'll get many, because we want to be getting multiple records here. So I can go ahead and I can start up the API by running an npm run start :dev. Now recall that this is protected, so we will need to sign in to make the call. So let's just make it on Postman first to ensure that it's working correctly. So if we go and try and make our GET request, we'll get in 401 because we're not signed in. But if we do go ahead and log in, and I'll just log in as John2, we'll get this token back, and then we'll go ahead and we'll place it in here, and then we're able to get it, and we're getting it in reverse order. So that new post I created just before in the demonstration, that's at the top here, and we're getting 5 in this one because we're saying 5. Now if I wanted to skip 5, for example, you can just go ahead and plug that in, and we've seen this before. So now we're in a good starting position to be able to make this on our front end side of things. So one thing to note is we are authorizing, there is authentication through this JSON web token, and that allows access to the core. So we have the ability to generate a JSON web token on the front end side of things, but we need to attach it to a request. So when you log in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a HTTP interceptor, and it will look in the local storage where the JSON web token is, or on the device's native storage, and it will attach that to following request in the authorization as the header, and that will permit if it is a valid token. So if I go ahead and I open up another terminal here, what I'll do is I'll start by just creating this, so I'll cd firstly into the LinkedIn folder, and then I want to make a service for our authentication interceptor. So I'm going to use the Ionic CLI to generate a service for us. Now I'm finished with the backend side of things, so I'm just going to close those up and go into our LinkedIn folder, in the app, in the auth, in the services, this is where we're going to put our our interceptor. So auth services, and we'll call it auth interceptor. And I don't want any of those spec files around, so I'll just run a skip test. Let that generate. And we'll go ahead and we'll begin to work on that. So what we can do is, firstly, we want to go to the class where it's named auth interceptor service. And we're going to want to implement a class here to keep the interface correctly aligned with the HTTP interceptor, and we can just bring that in from Angular common HTTP. Now this requires us to use the intercept method. So if we just go ahead and call that, now this is going to return an observable based on the HTTP event, and any HTTP request we make will be intercepted, so that can be in any form. So it's actually okay if we use an any here. Now we're going to need to bring these in. So basically what's happening here is, because it's implementing this HTTP interceptor, it's any HTTP request that we make will call this intercept method. So there's a request which is of the type HTTP request. That's an input, and that's once again okay to be of the any type. And then there's also this next here, and this will require HTTP handler, and this is something that we'll be able to use on our request. So let's just go ahead and bring those in. And this is just erroring because we're not returning something. So what we'll do is, we want to access our JSON Web Token from storage. So recall that we can use capacitor. So that's a wrapper over the top of the device storage on mobile phones, as well as the local storage. And we'll be able to get our token key from there, but recall that returns a promise, so we will need to wrap this in a from, so we can convert the promise into an observable. That way we can use the pipe method and the pipeable operators. So we can go ahead and bring in plugins from capacitor. Let's see. So that means we're able to access the storage method, which does the bespoke logic behind the scenes for us. And the key that we want to get is the key called token, and we've defined all this in the previous videos. So now that we are returning this promise here, this observable wrapping the promise, we're able to call the methods, the pipeable methods on it. So we can just go ahead and have a pipe here. Now we want to return an observable of this HTTP event of this any type here, but this isn't. This is returning another type for us, in particular an observable of the value string type. But we can go ahead and we can use the switch map operator. So we can tack on the previous observable and we can return a new type of observable. And we can use the information that the other observable returns as intermediate steps. So we know just by looking at this, it's returning data with a nested value in an object which is of the string type. So we can go ahead and get some IntelliSense and type safety just by saying, okay, well, we're expecting a value of the string in the data there. And data, it doesn't actually know that the storage is a token because this is just basically a string in the browser or in the device. So we have to just say that it's data for now. But we can actually just do something simple, like we can say, well, the token, well, this is just if we got data, it's the value of the data. So basically, if we have a token, what we want to do is we want to clone the request. So we make a HTTP request. Let's say we're trying to get the feed post. We want to get the request, but we're intercepting that request. So the first thing we want to do is just get the request. So we can say, okay, we have this cloned request, and that's based on the request that's incoming. And then there's this clone method. But the reason we're doing this rather than just using the request is because if we have the token, we want to attach in the headers the authorization token. So that means we can just go ahead and we can say for the headers here, we can, for the request, we can say the headers, we can go ahead and we can set the authorization here. And these are just built into Angular basically. So this is just the format here that you follow along with the documentation. But what we're doing here is we are using this bearer token. So we're using a bearer token on our backend. So we're just going to have to prefix it, the token, with this bearer part of the string, so the request is able to identify the token type. And you can see this in Postman, for example. We can see that we've got this token and we've got this bearer space token here. So we just go ahead and keep in line with the recommendations there. So basically this will, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, well, we're able to return, and this is where we use next. So recall we had this HTTP handler, so we're able to handle that clone request by attaching these headers to it. So we can just say we want the call the next method, so we can handle that cloned request, and that will do all the work for us by attaching the auth headers and whatnot. So we can save that. However, if there isn't a token, that means we just want to return the request as is. Now the reason we do this is because not all of our routes might be protected. We might have some routes that are just openly accessible and you don't need a token. So you can just go ahead and just make the normal request. So now I've got the auth interceptor set up. We just need to configure it. And so if we go ahead and go to our app module here, if we scroll down to the providers, right now we've got one provider here. Now, if we want to have another provider, we can just simply add another one in like this. So we can say we want to provide, and Angular has something built in called HTTP Interceptors, so we'll need to bring that in. So control period, Okay, so it's already auto imported it for us from Angular Common HTTP. So we know that we need the interceptors. So that means in the app module, we know that there's an interceptor, a HTTP interceptor, but we need to show where this is going to be. And we can do this by using use class and the name of this interceptor here. So auth interceptor service, we can use this. Now this, we'll bring that in, but this won't work by itself because now we have multiple providers, and because we've already got this Ionic stuff here, we will need to just go ahead and add a multi is equal to true, so we have multiple providers available. Now if you're in a regular Angular app, you won't have this, so you could just skip that. But as your application grows anyway, you may want some other providers here, so you can just chuck on this multi equals true. So that should be doing the work to get the JSON Web Token from storage and applying it to our request. So with that logic set up, we can begin to work on what we actually want to work on. And we can just run an Ionic Serve just to see where our application is up to. So we can see that if I press F12 and go to the console here, and I go to start a post, and I just say, hey, now we just get the console log here. It's not actually persisting to the database. So, and it also isn't coming to the top of our feed. And we've also got no editing functionality here. So that's why I've added the user to each of the posts, because we do have our, is the user the author of the post, and depending on that, or if they're an admin, that's how we'll go ahead and display the edit and delete buttons. And we'll also configure it so that all of the posts, they can change or be removed as you press them, and the editing functionality ties in with this modal pop-up as well. So now we've got a bird's eye view. Let's go ahead and just go to our we can go to our post service. So we've got this post service here. Now this is where we can start to work on our methods. So let's say I want to create a method. I want to create a post. Now we've already set this up on the back end side of things, but a create post, all we really need for that is we just need the body. So the user is coming from the JSON Web Token, and the ID is going to be incremented, and the created at it will be auto generated for us. And there's that relation that we just set up with the author associated with the post, and that's how we're going to detect if they are able to edit or delete the request. So all we really need to do is just send a body, and we know that's just a string. So we can go ahead and we can just say, okay, we're expecting a body string. Now, we don't have to explicitly put the type here if we don't want to. If you prefer, you can, but it's actually implied by the this.http through the HTTP client post, and we can see when we make the request on the back end, we're getting a post back. Now we might need to just pop over into our models here, into our post model, and we want to just go ahead and just get a author here, and this is of the type user. So recall that we've defined that over here, and a user is also going to have a bunch of posts. which is a post array, and we can just go ahead and we can bring that in as well. So that's the model, and because this is returning a post, it's implied that this is returning a post, and you can see that in the method, in the intelligence there. Now we've got this HTTP event now because we are returning the using the interceptors. So we can just go ahead and we can just copy something like this here, which is the template literal syntax, where we get the base API URL, and then we got the feed here, and now we don't want any params here. And if we just look at the endpoint, once again we just see it's a feed, but it's with the post request. So the post request, it requires some HTTP options. So I've actually done this somewhere before. If I go ahead and I just search for HTTP options, we can see in the auth service we've set this up previously. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this out. Now you can, of course, you can refactor this higher, but you know, that's up to you. So we'll just bring in the HTTP headers, HTTP options. It's a private variable returning an object of the headers. With headers is just a new HTTP headers, and all we're doing is we're just specifying that we want the application to be of the JSON format. So we are expecting the body as a string in here. So as a second parameter, what we can do is we can say, okay, the body is going to be set as a body, and this is essentially saying this here. So the object with the body key is going to be set to whatever the dynamic body value that's passed into it is going to be. So that's just the syntax for that. Now we just need to specify that we want the HTTP options that we just defined to be in there. And what I'll do is I'll use this approach where I use the pipe operator, and that means I can use the take one. So I'll just need to import take one, and what this does is if you have an observable, you need to unsubscribe from the observable unless you're using the async pipe in the template as we are here. But when I'm creating a post, rather than that's going to be done based on a button click, so that means it's going to be implemented logic in the TypeScript, and rather than unsubscribing or using ng on destroy or anything, you can just go ahead and do this pipe take one, because you only really want to take one anyway because you're creating a post, and this is going to be true for the update post and the delete post, and that just automatically destroys the observable after you've taken one. So it's an asynchronous event, so you need it to be an observable, but you only really need one thing to happen per operation, or per time it's every time this service method's called. So that's why we have the pipe take one. Now while we're here, we may as well call the update post, and actually we can just go ahead and copy this method here. So if we go into Postman and we take a look at this here, now this, once again, it only takes a body, and that's because the ID is going to be passed in as a param. So that means we can just go to our create post here. It's also going to take a body of the string type. Now when we call it, we aren't getting anything useful, any useful type back to us. So it's actually okay to just go ahead and just remove the type here. Now this is going to be the put method, and this is going to be updating the post, and it will be reaching this feed part, but we will also want to tack on this post ID. And that means we're going to want the post ID as an input, and that's going to be a number. So we'll be able to hit the endpoint /feed/ whatever the number is that's passed to us. We only want the body to be updating, and it's going to update whatever the post ID passed to it. And once again, we pass in the HTTP options and pipe 1. So the final CRUD operation we'll need here is the delete post method. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy this one more time. Now, we're not going to need the body because all we'll need is the post ID. So we can go ahead and just remove that there. So the URL will be the same, and let's just take a look at the shape of this here. The return type is once again irrelevant to us. So if we just go ahead and we look at our delete post method using the HTTP client service, we can go ahead and we can call this delete method to this same location. However, there's no need to specify any JSON type or any body because we aren't interested in those for a delete method. And then once again, we'll just pipe and take 1. So we've got our post service set up here. So probably the first thing we want to do is we want to just log in, just make sure our get method is still working. So if I do a john2@hotmail.com, and we do note that we are getting this in the reverse order, so that's great. And we've got our, so the get part works. So now we want to do the create, update, delete methods. So let's start with the create method. So let's just go ahead and just see what happens here when we do a create, just to see all of the components used. So we call this start post component, and then that brings up this modal here. We type in our text, we click post, and then we're getting data back into the start post component. Now we also want this to be in the all post component. So let's just go ahead and open up a few files here to see what we're talking about. Now if I start at the very base, I go into the home page even, we can see that we're going to have information in this app start post component, but we want it in this app or post. So how can we get information in sibling components? Well, we can use the event emitter and then have an input here. So there's going to be an output variable here, and then it's going to be input into this component, and that's one way. Or we could have a service, a general service. The service would typically be more scalable if you start generating more and more nested components, but because I already know the scope of this project, because I'm just doing a clone project, I thought because I've already done services and stuff like that, I might demonstrate from a learning point of view how to do the event emitters approach. So okay, so I'm going to open up this home page here. Basically, I'm also going to open up the start component. So in the components here, I open up this start post. Open up this start post. And I may as well open up the modal as well. Okay, so this is what's happening. in our start post, we click, well, this part here, this part of the component that we're looking at on the screen here, this is referring to the start post component here. So we can see we've got our card and our header with our image, and then start a post here. So this refers to this part here, and this is where the data is being returned to. So when we open up this, we click the button, we call this present modal. So we click the button, it presents the modal to us. Now if we look at the TypeScript, the present modal, what it does is uses the modal controller, and it goes ahead and it gets the data for us. So when the modal was closed, it will get the data for us. And that data there, this is based on this modal component here. So this modal component is just a form with a text field or a text area. And if we go ahead and we click post here, what this does is when it gets dismissed, so on post, so that's being called on the ng form, template form, provided that there's data in there and it's not blank and it meets our validation, it just gets that value for the body. And then when we dismiss it, we pass that in. Now we don't need this created at date because that's going to be generated for us on the back end when we create our record here. But that post body is, because this is an async function, we can use the await operator. So it gets presented for us, and then we await for it to be closed. And if there's data, well, then we're just logging it, and we're logging that data to this start post component. So we've got the data here. So we want to get it over into our app or posts. And to do that, in the start post component, I'm going to use an output because I want to use an event emitter. So I'm just going to call this create, and this is going to be of the type event emitter, and this is can be an any type here, and we can say we can call a new event emitter. So we instantiate a new object for the event emitter. Now we'll need to bring the event emitter in. Let's see here. Okay, this got imported from the wrong path. So this should be coming from Angular Core. So we'll save that. And basically when we present our modal, now there's going to be two cases we want to present the modal when we're creating a post, but we also want to present the modal when we're editing the post. And you could refactor this out, but I'm going to have the logic separately with some slight duplication there. But please feel free to refactor that if you wish to put in a service or something like that. But essentially, since we want the data from this start component to be out in another component, we use this output here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do a console log here, right at the top here, and I'm just going to say create post, and that's just to make sure that I'm in the create post method, because I'm going to, as I said, have an edit post which is calling the same modal, so that will just ensure that we're in the right place. Now everything, all this is looking okay. But what I will do here is we'll present the modal, and if there's no data, meaning there's nothing in the form, we can just go ahead and we can just return out. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and we'll just say this dot create dot emit, and we'll emit the data post body. So we no longer need this role. So we can go ahead and we can emit the data post body. So that means in the place that we're calling it in the home page, we can go ahead and on the app start post component that we define the output method on for create, we can go ahead and we can just call something in this local area. So in the home page TypeScript, we can have something called onCreatePost. Now this takes in this $ event, but this $ event refers to what we just done in the start post component. So we got this output method create, and this method will be able to pass data into our home page when we have this create post modal called and dismissed with data, and the data that's getting emitted is the post body. So that's just the data post body, and we can just go ahead and create. So when that create method gets called, we can handle that in our TypeScript here. So let's just have the case where we have this variable here, body is equal to an empty string, and we already have validation to make sure that if it's an empty string it won't send the request. So this is just, all this is taking, that event object is just the body itself, because that's what we passed in. And even though it's an event object, we've passed in what we want it to be. So we just got that string of the body there. So we can just go ahead and set this body equal to body. And the reason I'm defining this variable here, body, is because actually, if you take a look back at the template here, this all post component, it needs that body, because it needs to be able to create a in the view a new post. So obviously it needs the post to be able to do that, and obviously you're signed in so you'll be able to get the user in that way, and other things are created. So okay, we can more or less just close this TypeScript file, and we can close this CRUD service as well, just so we have a few less files open. But what we want to do here is we want to pass in the post body into our all post, and we just want to pass in the body. And what we I think I need to make a input variable on, I'm going to need an input variable to bind that body from the home page into this all post. So the output is going out of the component into this home page, and that input saved on the home page can be input into this all post component. So if I open up the all post component, open up the TypeScript for that. Let's see here. or post. Get a template up as well. Now I can just go up to the where the we define the decorated fields. So I can get the input here, bring that in, and the post body. Now we won't always have the post body, so we'll make this optional of a string. But what we can do is we can have another life cycle method here. So we can have this, below this ng on init, we can have an ng on changes, and this detects the input variable changes. So we can just say of type simple changes, bring that in from Angular Core. Now you could use a setter as well if you'd prefer that, but basically when this or post component detects a change in that input variable, we can get the post body, because that's what the input variable is. It is the post body. So we can say the post body is equal to the changes, and associated with those changes there's the post body, and then there's the current value, because this changes method it's able to tell the current value or previous value and all that sort of stuff. So that's just built in. Now if there is no post body, we want to just return. Now I really shouldn't get to that stage, but just a safety check. And that also checks in the very first case when things load up, when the variable's set and there's nothing in it. So they'll just exit out of that as well. So it's not any extra requests or anything like that. Not that it would make it through anyway, but you know, you want a good, nice, clean user experience. This post service, now we can call the create post method. We can call the post body and go ahead and subscribe. Now we know that we're going to get a post back. So what I'll do here is, so this will save it to the database, and we've subscribed to it, and then we get the post back, as you can see in the post method here. You just post the body and you get the whole post object back, including the author and those details. So since you get the post back, we also want to make it so that when it's in the database and it's made everything successfully, that we get another one of these at the top. So right now it's running through a for loop, and they're being displayed, but it's in an infinite scroller, so more and more requests are being made, but we just want this to be pre-pended up to the top here, so in our view. So we need to handle the data layer and the view layer. So since we have this all loaded post method here and we're already looping through that, we just want to go ahead and we'll say that this all loaded post, and then we can go ahead and we can just call an unshift here, and we can just say post. So let's give it a try. We'll see if we've missed anything here. So okay, I've got my person logged in, admin2, get the create post method. We'll say hello, this is a new post. Okay, well, it didn't quite do what we wanted here. Well, let's see if it added to the database. Okay, it didn't make it to the database either. So we've obviously missed something critical here. And it very well could be not saving this method here. So that wasn't working, so let's try this again. So this is a new post. Okay, so it actually added it to the top here for us where we want it. Now we can check the database. And we scroll down because it's in reverse order. We get this is a new post. Okay, great. The create post method worked for us. So let's move on to the delete method, and we'll just need to add some little buttons here in our all post component for each of the posts. So let's just go ahead and get those icons going. So we'll just need to work on the UI of the home page of the start post, the all post component. Sorry. So right now the layout is we got a column here, column here. Now I might just have another column here and push it to the right and take it up a little bit to get the alignment all good. So what I'll do after this second iron coal here is I'll go ahead and I'll have another iron coal. Now I only want the buttons to be here if the user, the ID of the person logged in is the same as the ID of the author that wrote the post. So if we go into our TypeScript file, what we'll need to do is we'll need to get the user ID. So we can get the user ID, and this is going to be an observable. So we can just go ahead and we can make this a behavior subject, which is going to be of the number, and we make it a behavior subject so we can subscribe to it without necessarily calling the next method straight away. But on our ng on a init method here, we have this get post false. That's just on the initial load. But if we take a look at our auth servers, so we'll need to inject this. So private auth service of the type auth service, bring that in. And if we just press F12 here, we can just go ahead and we can see that we have the user, and then we have these methods is user logged in and user role. Now we also want to have one for the user ID. So we can just go ahead and copy this get method here. And we can say get the user ID, and this is just going to return an observable of the number type, and it returns the behavior subject and it converts it to an observable. So then we can use this new observable and we can pipe into it, and we can use the switch map operator so it returns this other observable for us. And we know that this user here, it's going to return the whole user. So rather than returning that, we just want to return the ID of the user here. So we can go ahead and just save that. Now, let's see, return. Now, I was wondering why I was getting an error. The user ID should actually be a number. String, string, string role post. Okay, so let's just save that. And now if we go to our auth service, we'll actually get the correct return types there. So now we have that set up, we can go back to our all post component and we can actually call that service. So we can say this.auth service, and we can get the user ID. We don't have to call get because we created a get method or a get keyword. in our service. So based on that, we can pipe into that. We can go ahead and use this take one approach that we've been so familiar with, and we can subscribe to that observable. Now we're getting the user ID back. This is just a number. So since we got our behavior subject set up, we can just go ahead and we can just say the user ID. We can just, for that behavior subject, we can actively call the next variable that we want it to hold, and that will be the user ID. Now we're only getting it once per login. That's why we have this take one. So this will, but if you sign out, sign back in with another user, this will be able to handle that case. So since we've got the user ID of the signed in user, we can go to our template and we can protect the column that we're about to write, and we can have an ng if here, and we're going to say for that user ID, and it's an observable like variable here, so we're going to need to use the async pipe. Now we're already looping through all of our posts, so what we can do here is we can say if the user ID is equal to the post.author.id, that means the logged in user was the person that created the ID. Then I'll go ahead and I will just show them these, well, I haven't created them yet, but you can imagine that there's going to be two icons times 2. So actually I might just get one, so I'll just duplicate one. So the first one we're going to do, now it's called create outline, but it kind of looks like an add button, so I chose that. We'll make this the dark color that we've set in our variables. Now I'm going to have a, let's just copy this down here. And rather than dark, I'm going to have a danger, because I want a red icon for the trash outline button. And I've just gone ahead of time, and I've got some styling here that I'll add in just so everything lines up. But I just want it to be, the font size to be 18 pixels. And I also just want the cursor to be of the pointer type, so it looks more like you can click it. And we will indeed add a clicking ability. And I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate that down to the second iron icon here. Now, both of these icons, and I should just add to the actual column, I just want a little bit of styling to bring it up a little, because it's going to be centered due to the justify content center and item center. But I don't want it to be centered, I want it to be out the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and hard code this 32 pixels here. And I want the text to be aligned to the right. So I'm just going to say iron text right. So that'll bring the icons right to the right rather than starting at the start. So let's just see what that looks like, just to see if things are decent. Alright, so we've got these two clickable things here. Well, they're not clickable yet, but they appear clickable. So let's just go ahead and make a little function here. So we just want, on the click of this icon, we want to go ahead and present the update modal. And this is just going to take in the post ID. Now I can also go ahead and copy this down to the second icon, and I can just go ahead and call this delete post. So let's just go ahead and write these into the TypeScript file, and we'll just console log things out. So we've got this one here, your post component, the present update modal. Now for now, I'm just going to take in this post ID, and this is where I'm going to console log edit post. And just for now, I'm also just going to have this post ID here just to make sure it's the right one. And I'm going to also have my delete post method. So we can just pass in the post ID here as well. And we can just go ahead and just say, we can just copy this here. Although here we'll just say delete. So let's just save that, and we should save this, and then we'll just see if those methods get fired, making sure everything that works smoothly. So this is a new post, and new post 29 and 28 in the database. So yep, 29, 29, 28, 28. So those methods are firing all right. Now it would probably be easier to start with the delete method. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can work on the logic in the all post component, and we can just go ahead, and we've already made the API call in our service. So we can just go ahead and call that. So we just call this post service, and we've already got that in from the get post method before. So we can just call the delete post method that we defined earlier, pass in the post ID, and we'll need to subscribe for anything to useful to happen, otherwise nothing will happen. Now what we want to do here, similar to the when something changes and we create something and we want to go ahead and unshift or bring it to the top of the array or the beginning of the array in the UI. So we make the data change, but we also want to say that all the loaded posts, and this is going to be equal to all the loaded posts that are currently there, but we do just want to filter out. So we're going to get for each of the posts of the type post, if the post ID is not equal to the post ID, filter it out. So you click the delete button, and through the for loop on the UI, it's able to identify the post ID. Now this will only be showing if you are the logged in user. Then you can call the API method and subscribe to it to delete it from the database. And if it turns out, so they'll fire. Then when that's fired, we want to change the UI. And if it turns out that the post ID from the UI is equal to the post ID that we're getting from the return statement, we'll essentially filter it out. So let's just see that works. So this is a new post. Let's delete it. Removes it from the UI completely. And if we go ahead and we just reload, we see the latest post is new post, and the 29 has been deleted. So we're doing well. We've done the creating, we've done the reading, we've done the deleting. Now all we want to do is the updating. So let's think about how we can do that. So let's see. What we want to happen is we want to call this edit post, and we want it to pop up this modal. But rather than saying create post and post, we want it to say edit post. And then when we edit the post for this post ID that we've clicked on, we want that to call the edit post that we defined in our service there. We don't want to mix up the start and the edit post. And you could refactor this into one area, but it's simple enough to have it in two. There's some light duplication, but of course if it's bothering you, you can just refactor it. So let's think here. We want to go from the all post component this time, and we want to call the modal, and we want to have some data associated with the modal, and we just want to call a separate API call. So we have the skeleton for our present update modal function here. Now if we go to our all post component, the start component, we can copy this present modal over, and we can put it in here. So I'm going to have this edit post, and of course I'm going to need to make this async. Let's see what happened here. Get rid of this, get rid of this, and rather than this create post, I'm going to have this here. And this is what I was talking about with the duplication here. Now you will need to bring in the modal component, and you will need to go to the constructor and to inject the modal controller. So let's go ahead and get that in as well, and we'll make this public modal controller because it's in a different section and it's going to have some data associated between the two. So let's go ahead and bring that in, copy this here, and we'll just check we've got the modal component as well, so it's looking good. Modal controller from Ionic Angular. So we'll just make some tweaks here. So we're getting our post ID. So we're just editing posts, so that we'll just make sure that that's doing the right thing. It's calling the right method. We want to await the modal controller and create modal component. However, we want to pass in some data here, and we can do this by using the component props key, and we can pass in some our post ID here. So we can await for that, and we can get our data out when it's dismissed. And if there's no data, we can just return. But what I will do here, instead of this create emit, is I'm going to, and I might just space this out a little, separate the inner logic. Now I'm just going to create a constant variable called the new post body, and I'm saying it's new post body rather than post body, just to eliminate any confusion that may arise. If you passed in the post body from the template, that'd be the old post body, and you might want to do that if you wanted to pre-populate the text field, for example, but I'm not going to go ahead, and you'd also need to put that into component props here, but I'm not going to do that. But when you get the data back, it's going to have the post data, which also contains the body. So we can, this is the point where we can more or less call our post service to actually update the post for us. So we can just pass in the post ID that we just found through our modal, this other sort of modal. It's the same modal. It's showing the same modal, but the way we call the modal, we're passing in the post ID through clicking the edit button, so we have access to which particular ID we are using here, and that's how we can call the update post method. We need the post ID, but we also need the new post body, and that's coming from the modal itself when it got dismissed. So you type something in, you click the button, and then asynchronously you'll wait for that, and when we get that back, that's what we're updating it. It all happens pretty fast. But because this is an asynchronous operation here, we're going to need to subscribe to it. Now we're not going to do anything with the data that it gives back. It's what you've seen before. It's not of a concern to us, those sorts of types. But we will want to update the user interface. So to do that, we first need to find the index. So we're in the all post component, and we have all loaded posts, and we've seen with the creating and deleting how we interact with the UI. So we want to do the same thing here, but you actually need to find the index of it, because it could be anywhere for the update case. So after you make the API call, you want to update the UI. So we can say this dot or loaded posts, and actually we're going to need the index before that, so we can just comment this out for a second so we don't get any potential errors. We can say that the post index is equal to, okay, so we can just use it here, this dot or loaded post, and then we have this find index method, which will find the object in our array, the index in our array of the object with a particular ID that we're looking for. So for the post, which is just a post, we can say if the post ID, so if the post from all the posts that are already loaded through our get method, if that ID is equal to the post ID that we pass in by clicking on the actual, in an individual post, if that particular ID is equal to the one in the array, that's where the index will be. So if you clicked on the first post, for example, in array, you'll get the 0th index, and so on. Now with that post index, we can say for our all load post, for that post index that we just found out, we can change the body in our UI to the new post body. And one final thing before we test it out is, if we go, because we are passing in these component props here into our modal, we do want to have an input variable, but we're calling this modal when we're calling post, and there won't be any input data. So we just want to have some optional post ID, and it's optional with the question mark and number here, and we can go ahead and we can save that. Now one more thing I want to do is I just want to change the text in the modal component. So if I just go ahead and I open up the template here, now I only want the word create if we have a post ID. So we have this post ID if it's in the edit state. So if we have a post ID, we can say edit a post. Otherwise we can say create a post. And we can copy this same sort of logic here just down to our button down at the bottom here. And if we have the post ID, we want to edit, otherwise we want to post. So that should be everything that we need here. So let's go ahead and edit this new post here. And we see we get edit a post, edit, and we call this edited post. We click edit, and we get the edited post here at the top. And if we check our database here one more time, we can see that right at the bottom we get the edited post. So we've completed all of the CRUD operations here. Let's just do one final check to make sure everything's working. So what we've done to recap is we just quickly got the format of our data. So it was ordered and it had the author associated with it. Now one thing I should probably check, yeah, so this one here at the bottom doesn't have the edit button and the delete button, and that's because if we look at the data here in Postgres, we can see that 2's created all of them except for this very first one. So just to recap, we got the format in reverse order. We used the query builder on NestJS real quick. And then we also associated the author with the post, and that made it so we're able to check if the logged in user is the author, and if so we display these icons. If not, we don't display the icons. We use the HTTP Interceptor to get the token from local storage or in your device's storage using the capacitor storage method, and that's it. This token's attached to all further requests if it's there, otherwise it won't be attached. But if it's not attached for a needed request, it obviously will be unauthorized, although there's sufficient handling in the logic of the UI along with the backend. Now there isn't. We will need to implement error handling, but that'll be a topic for another video. But with that token attached, and provided it's not expired, I mean it's a valid JSON web token, we're able to start a post. This is the latest post. We've got this create post method here, this post here. We can go ahead and we can delete this edited post, and we can go ahead and we can edit a post, and we can just say new edited post, and we can get that. And all of this is happening, it's affecting the data layer or the database, and we can see we got this new edited post here, and it deleted the other one, and it also is consistent with showing it in the UI using RxJS, observable subjects, and all of that. So yeah, that's all of the CRUD operations with user authentication and authorization and RxJS to streamline everything in the UI. Now I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.